Once upon a time, in a city full of gods, there was a man who almost lost his soul by trying to protect what he thought was sacred. This is the story of Demetrius, the silversmith of Ephesus, the man who made idols for a living until he found out who the real God was. The fire in the workshop crackled, painting the walls with orange shadows. Demetrius leaned over the table, hammer in hand, chisel in place. A small silver statue of Artemis lay in front of him, unfinished. Its eyes were still hollow. Its base wobbled when touched. He stared at it. Then slowly, he sighed. He wasn't alone, but it felt like it. Around him were half-built shrines, tools, metal filings scattered like glittering dust. The smell of burnt clay and melted wax clung to everything. His apprentice, young Kimon, slept in the corner, curled up in rags near the furnace, snoring softly. Demetrius set down his tools. He rubbed his calloused hands together and muttered, "Another one for the goddess." He looked up at the rows of tiny statues on the shelves, dozens of them, all smiling, all lifeless. "How many of these have I made?" he asked the silence. And the silence answered him with a whisper from his past. He remembered being a boy, walking with his father along the cliffs outside Ephesus. The wind had whipped at their cloaks. His father had pointed at the massive temple in the distance. "That's where the power is, Demetrius," he'd said. "You learn how to carve her face into silver and you'll never be hungry." Demetrius had believed him. And it had been true. The goddess Artemis, stone version, silver version, wooden version, it didn't matter. People came from everywhere to buy her image, and Demetrius became rich. But now the fire didn't feel warm. Now the statue didn't feel sacred. He stood up, paced across the room, and stared out the small window. The moon hung low over Ephesus, glowing like a coin. But down below, something strange had begun stirring in the city. A new name was being whispered in the alleys and homes. Not Artemis, Jesus. And Demetrius didn't like it. He didn't like how fast it was spreading, and he didn't like how people who bought statues last year were now saying, "No thank you." And he really didn't like that some of the silversmiths in town had started muttering that maybe this new god didn't need silver at all. Demetrius turned back to the fire. He picked up the silver idol, and for the first time in his life, he hesitated before placing it on the shelf. The next morning, Demetrius awoke to the sound of hammers, but not his own. He stepped outside the workshop, blinking into the sunlight. The streets of Ephesus were unusually loud. Not with celebration, with arguments. He saw a crowd gathering near the western fountain, where merchants usually sold grapes and travelers washed the dust from their sandals. Today, no one was buying. No one was washing. They were listening. A man stood on the stone platform near the water, hands raised, voice clear. "I tell you, friends, these idols are nothing but metal and stone. The true God is not made by human hands." Demetrius stopped cold. He clenched his jaw. Another one. Another follower of this Jesus who kept showing up and stirring the pot. A silversmith named Theron was standing near the crowd. Demetrius walked over. "What's going on?" he muttered. Theron looked at him, nervous. "It's one of them, a traveler. He's been preaching outside the baths all week." Demetrius narrowed his eyes. "Has no one reported him?" "They tried," Theron whispered. "But people are listening now. Really listening. Some even smashed their statues last night." Demetrius turned fast. "Smash them?" Theron nodded. Burned scrolls too. Magic ones. Expensive ones. Said they belonged to their old life. Demetrius stared at the speaker again. The man's words were still ringing out across the square. No silver, no gold, no carved image can give you peace. Only Jesus of Nazareth can do that. Demetrius felt heat crawl up his neck. "Enough of this!" he growled. He pushed through the crowd. The preacher stopped mid-sentence as Demetrius stepped up to him. "Ephesus is a city of Artemis," Demetrius said loudly so all could hear. "And she does not need to be insulted by a stranger." The preacher looked him in the eye. "She doesn't need to be defended either," he said calmly. "If she is truly a god, let her speak for herself." The crowd murmured. Demetrius stepped closer. "Who are you to speak against the goddess of this city?" "I'm just a man," the preacher said. "But the God I serve is not made of silver. He made you." The crowd fell quiet. Demetrius stared at the man, then turned on his heel and stormed off. As he walked away, the crowd began to follow the preacher again. But Demetrius's mind was racing. This wasn't a random speech. This was a threat. And not just to Artemis, to his business, to his reputation, to everything he had built. He clenched his fists. "Silver can shine," he muttered, "but it can't silence a storm." That night, the workshop didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. Demetrius paced between shelves of silver statues, their tiny blank eyes seeming to follow him. The furnace hissed in the corner. Even the flames felt different now. Less warm, more like they were watching. He slammed a hammer onto the table, making Kimon jolt awake in the corner. "Go home," Demetrius snapped. "I need the night." Kimon rubbed his eyes. "Did I mess something up again?" "No," Demetrius muttered. "This isn't about you." After the boy left, Demetrius sat alone staring at the half-finished idol on his bench. The chisel lay beside it. His hands were steady. But his heart? Not so much. Then he heard it. A whisper, not outside, but inside. "You're not afraid for the goddess. You're afraid for yourself." He stood quickly, knocking over a stool. "Number, I'm protecting the truth." But truth didn't tremble the way he was trembling now. The next morning, he called a meeting. By noon, 20 craftsmen were crowded into the back of the bronze market, men who carved, cast, polished, and shaped images of Artemis every day, some younger, some old, all anxious. Demetrius stood on a crate, hands raised. "You know me," he began. "You've worked with me. You've bought my silver. You know I don't panic over nothing." The room murmured agreement. "Well, I'm panicking," he said, "because our way of life is under attack." Heads turned, eyebrows raised. "There's a man in this city," Demetrius continued, "and others like him, followers of a foreign teacher named Jesus. They say gods made by hands are no gods at all." One of the older smiths, Leontes, raised a hand. "But Artemis has protected this city for generations. We all know her stories." "Stories don't sell statues," Demetrius snapped. "Belief does." The room went still. He realized his mistake but didn't stop. "If these men keep preaching," he pressed on, "no one will buy our work. The temple will be forgotten. Artemis will be dishonored. And we will be ruined." Some of the men nodded. Others looked at each other, unsure. One young silversmith, barely older than Kimon, asked softly, "But What if they're right? Demetrius turned sharply. Right? The boy shrank back. I just mean, what if the real God isn't something we can shape? What if he shapes us? Silence fell like a hammer. Demetrius stared at the boy for a long time. Then he said slowly, "You're in the wrong room," and pointed to the door. The boy stood, nodded, and left, alone. The rest of the men stayed, but the air was heavier now, not because of the heat, but because of the doubt he could no longer fully silence. Demetrius didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He sat by the workshop fire with a goblet in his hand and 1,000 thoughts in his head. The silver idols on the shelves seemed to stare at him, silent, motionless, powerless. Maybe that boy was right, he whispered. Then he shook the thought away. Number Artemis is Ephesus. If she falls, we fall. By sunrise, he was moving again, talking to merchants, stall keepers, bronze carvers, even cloth weavers. Not all made idols, but most had something to lose. These men are spreading lies, he told them. They want to tear down what we've built. Today, it's statues. Tomorrow, it's the temple itself. Fear does strange things to people. By noon, the whisper had become a chant. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. By mid-afternoon, the chant had become a roar. The streets shook with the sound. People poured out of shops, dropping baskets, leaving meals half-eaten. The sound traveled like a storm, rolling downhill. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Demetrius stood at the edge of the plaza, breath quick, heart pounding. This is how we fight, he muttered, loud, united, strong. And yet, somewhere deep in his chest, something twitched. Was it shame? Number? It couldn't be. This was right. Wasn't it? The crowd swelled. Someone shouted that Paul, the preacher, was nearby, that he was the one turning the world upside down. Another man shouted, "Drag them to the theater." And they did. The mob surged like a tidal wave. Demetrius ran with them, not leading, not stopping it, just part of it. The great theater of Ephesus echoed with thunder, thousands screaming, stamping, fists in the air. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. But in all the noise, Demetrius didn't yell. He just stood there, in the middle of the chaos he helped create, watching it swirl around him, watching truth and fear wrestle in his heart, and for the first time, he didn't know which one was winning. The theater trembled. Stone pillars shook from the weight of 10,000 stomping feet. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and anger. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Demetrius stood in the center aisle, not far from the stage. His fists were clenched, but he still hadn't joined the chant. All around him, people shouted until their voices cracked. Some pounded the ground with staffs. Others raised silver charms in the air like weapons. But Demetrius couldn't stop staring at the stage because someone had been shoved onto it, a man. Plain clothes, calloused hands, calm eyes. Not Paul, but one of his friends, a Jew. His name was Gaius, or maybe Aristarchus. Demetrius didn't know, but the man stood there without fear, without fire in his voice, just calm. Demetrius expected him to argue. He didn't. The man looked over the crowd, not with disgust, but with sadness. And then he spoke. Only a few people near the front could hear, but Demetrius was one of them. "Why are you angry?" the man asked. "We have taken nothing from you. We have broken no law. We only speak of the one who made the heavens and the earth." Someone threw a rock. It missed, but the crowd didn't calm. They howled louder. The city clerk appeared, red-faced and out of breath. He stood on the edge of the stage and lifted both hands. "Citizens of Ephesus," he shouted, "this is not the way." No one listened. He shouted again, "If you have a complaint, bring it to the courts. We are in danger of being accused of riot by Rome." That got their attention. Rome didn't tolerate riots. Rome sent swords. Slowly, the chanting weakened. The crowd thinned. And after nearly 2 hours of thunder, the theater emptied. Demetrius didn't move. He just stood there. The man on stage was being helped down by 2 others. And for the first time in his life, Demetrius felt something he had never felt before: powerless. He had started the fire, but he couldn't control the smoke. He had gathered a mob, but he couldn't silence the truth. He turned away, heart pounding. And from the edge of the theater, he heard the man's voice one last time. "Even silver melts in fire, but truth, it stands." The fire was still burning in the workshop when Demetrius returned. But it didn't feel warm. He stood in the doorway, staring at the cluttered benches, the glowing coals, the rows of tiny silver idols, all of them smiling the same lifeless smile. He stepped inside, slowly, like someone entering a tomb. Kimon wasn't there. No one was. Just the silver. Too much silver. Demetrius walked to the bench and picked up a half-finished statue of Artemis. Its face was smooth, perfect, untouched by thought. He held it in his hand and whispered, "Do you even care?" The statue didn't answer. Of course not. It never had. He placed it down, then picked up another, then another. Dozens of them, small, identical, beautiful, and hollow. He backed away. Something had changed, not in the statue, not in the city, in him. The words from the man on the stage still echoed in his mind. "Even silver melts in fire, but truth, it stands." Demetrius gritted his teeth. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to admit that one quiet man had undone what years of noise had built, but he could feel it, the shaking, not in the city, in his soul. He sat at the workbench and put his face in his hands. He had spent his whole life carving gods, but never once had he asked if one of them had carved him. He heard the door creak open. Kimon stepped in slowly, carrying a basket of coal. He paused when he saw Demetrius hunched over the table. "Master?" he asked. Demetrius didn't look up. Kimon set the basket down gently. "I saw the riot," the boy said quietly. "I heard the shouting." Demetrius still didn't answer. After a long moment, Kimon added, "One of the followers of Jesus gave me a scroll. I haven't read it yet." Silence. Then Demetrius finally spoke, his voice low, tired. "Bring it tomorrow." Kimon's eyes widened. "You want to read it?" "No," Demetrius said, then lifted his head, eyes hollow. "I want to hear it." The next morning came quiet and gray. Clouds rolled in over Ephesus like slow waves. A cool wind blew across the city, but Demetrius didn't notice. He sat inside the workshop, staring at nothing, his fingers motionless on the edge of the table. The furnace wasn't lit. For the first time in years, he had let the fire go cold. Kimon arrived at dawn, just as he always did. But this time, he carried something different in his arms, not a basket of coal or a bundle of metal, but a tightly rolled piece of parchment tied with a strip of faded cloth. He stepped in softly, not wanting to disturb whatever stillness had settled in the shop overnight. "Master," he said gently, "I brought it." Demetrius nodded, but didn't move. He waited. Kimon unwrapped the cloth slowly, hands careful, like he was holding something sacred. "I don't know everything that's in it," the boy said, "but the man who gave it to me said it came from the followers of the way, the ones who speak of Jesus." Demetrius finally looked up. "Read it." Kimon hesitated. "All of it." "All you can." So the boy began. At first, the words felt strange in the air, too soft for a room used to hammers and heat. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Demetrius frowned, his brow tightening. "Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made." The workshop was silent but for Kimon's voice, the crackle of the scroll, and the occasional creak of old wood. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Demetrius stood slowly and walked over to the shelves. He stared at the rows of silver statues, perfect and polished, glowing dully in the gray light. Kimon kept reading. "He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him." Demetrius reached for one of the idols, but this time he didn't place it proudly in his hand. He held it like a lie. "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." Demetrius turned the idol over and over in his hands. It had eyes, but no sight. It had a smile, but no voice. It had a shape, but no breath. His fingers trembled. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory. Demetrius whispered, "Not silver, not stone, flesh." He looked at Kimon, who had paused, wide-eyed, unsure if he should continue. Demetrius stepped forward, placed the idol gently on the table, and picked up his hammer. But he didn't return to carving. He held it in both hands and stared at it like it was a stranger. "I've spent my whole life shaping gods," he said, "and now I find out there's one shaping me." He let the hammer fall, not to build, but to break. The silver idol shattered on the table. Kimon gasped. Demetrius stared at the fragments, then whispered, "Keep reading." The sound echoed through the workshop. Metal against wood, silver against stone. The small idol shattered, its pieces scattering across the bench. Demetrius stood still, his chest rising and falling like someone who had just finished running or barely survived a fall. Kimon didn't move. He held the scroll in one hand, his fingers trembling slightly. His mouth was open like he wanted to speak, but didn't know if he should. Demetrius ran a hand over his face. "I didn't mean to do that," he said. "Then why did you?" Kimon asked gently. Demetrius sat down heavily on the stool. "Because it needed to happen." He picked up one of the fragments. A sliver of Artemis's face, part of an eye and cheek, still shined. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, holding it up between two fingers. "I've made hundreds of these, maybe thousands, but I never once asked, why?" Kimon didn't answer. Demetrius looked at the boy. "I thought I was doing something meaningful, sacred even, that these little Idols were protecting people, giving them hope. He shook his head. But now, I wonder if I was just selling lies. Kimon slowly walked over. My uncle used to say the same thing. Demetrius looked up, surprised. He used to sell charms, leather cords, coins with moon symbols on them. He told people they would keep bad dreams away, but he didn't believe it. Not really? What changed him? Demetrius asked. Kimon hesitated. He got sick, very sick. None of his charms worked. None of the statues helped. He gave them all away, every one. Said they were just heavy decorations for a heart that was already sinking. Demetrius was quiet. Then, and did he find anything that helped? Kimon smiled a little. He met a man who told him about Jesus, that he wasn't just a story, but a savior. Demetrius looked back at the broken silver on the table. I don't know if I can believe that, he whispered. Not yet. Kimon nodded. That's okay. You don't have to yet. Demetrius raised an eyebrow. I don't? Kimon shook his head. You just have to ask if you want to. Demetrius leaned back. Do I want to? He looked around the workshop, at the shelves of gods that never spoke, the furnace that always needed feeding, the coins stacked neatly in his lockbox. He used to love this place. Now it felt like a cage built out of comfort. Finally, he said, I think I'm tired of trusting things that don't bleed when they're broken. Kimon tilted his head. What does that mean? Demetrius looked down. I mean, I've made gods that never feel anything, never hurt, never help. And now I hear of a God who did hurt, who chose to be broken. For people like me? Kimon smiled. You're not too far gone, you know. Demetrius chuckled bitterly. Feels like I am. You're not, Kimon said. You're just halfway home. Demetrius turned toward him. And what's waiting at the other half? Kimon lifted the scroll again. Truth, forgiveness, and a name that doesn't need silver to shine. Demetrius looked at the broken idol one last time, then pushed the pieces aside. And for the first time in his life, he cleared the table. The table was empty now. Where there had once been rows of tiny idols, half-finished and polished for sale, now there was only the scroll, unrolled, open, waiting. Demetrius sat on one side of it. Kimon sat on the other. The furnace stayed cold. The silver stayed silent. But the words were alive. Kimon cleared his throat. You ready? Demetrius didn't speak. He just nodded. And the boy began to read again, this time from deeper in the parchment. His voice was slow, thoughtful. He wasn't just reading now. He believed what he was saying. Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, was betrayed into the hands of men. He was mocked, whipped, spit on, given a crown of thorns. Demetrius leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Wait, what? He interrupted. A crown of thorns? Kimon nodded. They twisted sharp branches and pressed them into his head. They were mocking him, calling him king. Demetrius's fists curled on the table. Not because he was angry, because he didn't understand. That's your God? He asked. A king who let himself be humiliated? Kimon didn't flinch. Yes, that's him. Demetrius looked at the empty shelf behind him. Dozens of silver crowns he had made over the years for Artemis statues, smooth, gleaming, perfect. But this god wore thorns. And they nailed him to a cross, Kimon read, between two criminals. And while he was dying, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Demetrius's voice cracked. "He said that?" Kimon looked up. "He did." Demetrius stood up suddenly, pacing the workshop like a man who couldn't stay still. "Forgive them? While they were killing him? Who does that?" Kimon said nothing, but the scroll did. "It is finished," Kimon continued. "That's what he said before he died." Demetrius stopped walking. Finished. He looked down at his hands, hands that had shaped gods, held coins, stirred mobs, hands that had never once offered peace. "He didn't fight back," Demetrius murmured. "He didn't defend himself. He surrendered." He turned to Kimon slowly. "But why? Why would he let them do it?" Kimon's voice softened. "Because he wasn't just dying. He was taking something with him." Demetrius frowned. "Taking what?" "Sin," Kimon said. "Guilt, shame, all the things that keep people from coming home to God." Demetrius's eyes stung. He didn't know why. He just knew something was happening in his chest, something breaking, not like silver under a hammer, but like a locked door finally creaking open. "Even people like me?" he asked. Kimon nodded. "Especially people like you." Demetrius sat down hard, then said, almost to himself, "A God who bleeds." He looked back at the scroll, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was losing something. He felt like he was being found. That night, Demetrius didn't light the furnace. Not out of forgetfulness, out of choice. For years, fire had meant power, wealth, the daily rhythm of shaping silver into gods and gods into income. But now, the fire felt like a lie, a glow that promised something sacred, but never delivered. He stood by the hearth in silence and didn't feed the flames. Kimon swept the floor quietly behind him, careful not to disturb the moment. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just stayed. Finally, Demetrius spoke. "I thought I was shaping gods," he said, "but now I wonder if I was just building chains." Kimon leaned on the broom. "Chains for other people?" Demetrius shook his head. "Number for me." He walked to the back of the shop, past shelves of tiny statues, some chipped, some perfect. All of them unfinished in the only way that mattered. He picked up a blank sheet of silver, ran his fingers across its surface, then set it back down. He wasn't going to shape it tonight, or maybe ever again. "Kimon," he said, turning, "do you think a man can start over after building his whole life on the wrong foundation?" Kimon nodded slowly. "I think Jesus made a habit of inviting people like that." Demetrius smiled sadly. "What does that even look like?" "Letting go," Kimon said, "turning around, starting again." Demetrius exhaled through his nose. "It sounds simple." "It's not," Kimon admitted, "but it's possible." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Demetrius walked to the wall where a small metal sign hung above the bench. His father had placed it there years ago when they opened the workshop. It read, "We shape what matters." Demetrius took it down, and laid it gently in the corner. "I think I need to start asking what really matters," he said. Kimon watched him, hopeful. "Do you want to come with me tomorrow?" the boy asked. "The man who gave me the scroll, he leads a group. They meet near the harbor, they talk, they pray, they don't pretend to be perfect, but they follow Jesus." Demetrius hesitated. Not because he didn't want to go, but because something inside him was already moving in that direction. He didn't answer with words, he just nodded, and for the first time in years, he slept without the fire. The morning came soft and gold. Sea air drifted in from the coast, carrying the smell of salt and wet wood. Ephesus stirred slowly, merchants lifting stalls, temple guards changing shifts, flocks of birds circling above the pillars of Artemis's temple. But Demetrius didn't go to the temple. He walked with Kimon along a narrow path between two old houses near the harbor, down an alley so quiet it felt like the city had forgotten it existed. Each step felt strange, like he was moving away from the world he had built and into something undefined. "You sure it's here?" Demetrius asked. Kimon nodded. "They don't meet in fancy places. They meet in homes. Jesus never needed temples." Demetrius took a deep breath. The house was small. Olive vines curled around the posts. The door was cracked open. Inside, he heard voices, low, warm. Someone laughed. Not loud, not wild, just honest. Kimon stepped in first. Demetrius followed. The room was simple. No silver, no carvings, no idols in corners. Just a wooden table, a few stools, a woven mat in the center. Candles glowed in niches along the wall. The light was soft, flickering, not for show, just enough to see each other's faces. About 12 people were there, men and women, young and old. No one wore robes of status. No one acted important. They looked up as he entered. Some smiled, some nodded, none stared. Demetrius stood still, unsure of what to do with his hands. Then a man with kind eyes approached. "You must be Demetrius," he said, offering a hand. "We've heard of you." Demetrius raised an eyebrow. "Not sure if that's a good thing." The man chuckled. "It's a beginning thing." Demetrius shook his hand. They sat. Kimon took a spot near the window. Demetrius sat on the mat, stiff at first. Someone passed him a small piece of bread. Another poured water into a clay cup. No one said, "Welcome, great craftsman." No one asked what he thought of the temple. They simply included him. The kind-eyed man opened a scroll and began reading. "Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love." Demetrius listened, head bowed slightly. The words were not poetry, not politics. They were more like instructions for breathing. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Demetrius closed his eyes. Something inside him, something that had been tight for years, exhaled. He had spent his life proving himself, fighting to be seen. Now these people spoke of something else entirely, letting go, lifting others, living by grace. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Demetrius looked around, and he realized some of these people had once worshipped Artemis. He could see it in their eyes, the knowing, the history, the shared path. He wasn't the only one with regrets. The man folded the scroll and looked at him. "Would you like to speak?" he asked. Demetrius hesitated, then nodded. He stood slowly, cleared his throat. "I made gods," he said. No one flinched. "I made gods with smiles and gold and eyes that never blinked. I sold them to people searching for something holy." He paused, but I was the one who was empty. He looked down at his calloused hands. "These hands have shaped lies, beautiful ones maybe, but lies." Silence. Then he looked up. "And now, I want to shape something real, if you'll have me." A woman in the corner smiled. "If Jesus had room for tax collectors and fishermen, he's got room for silversmiths." Another voice said gently, "Welcome home." Demetrius sat down again. This time, not as a guest, but as one of them. And as the gathering began to pray, Demetrius whispered under his breath, "Not silver, not stone, but something living." Weeks passed, then months, and everything changed, but not in the ways Demetrius expected. He didn't become famous. He didn't stand on stages. There were no choirs or parades or bright lights. He simply lived different. Quiet, honest, free. His workshop stayed open, but it didn't make gods anymore. The furnace still burned, but now it shaped tools for farmers, hinges for doors, bracelets for weddings. Silver was still beautiful, but it wasn't sacred anymore, not to him. What was sacred now? People, truth. The name of Jesus whispered across the harbor and echoed in the homes of fishermen and former idol makers. Kimon came every morning. They still worked together, sweat on their brows, dust on their clothes. But now, as they shaped metal, they spoke of scripture, of grace, of second chances. One afternoon, Kimon looked up from the anvil. "Do you miss it?" Demetrius wiped his forehead. "Miss what?" "The old life, the temple, the statues." Demetrius paused. "I miss the feeling," he said, "the illusion that I was in control, that I was needed, that I was doing something great." He tapped the metal with a soft rhythm. "But that feeling came with fear. I had to protect it, defend it, earn it." He looked up. "Now, I just follow." Kimon smiled. "And?" Demetrius shrugged, but his eyes glowed. "And it's lighter. Even when it's hard, it's lighter." That night, Demetrius sat by the harbor, scroll in hand. Not to read, just to hold it. He watched as the sun melted into the sea, turning the water gold. He remembered when gold had been his god, and silver, and status, but none of them stayed. They all bent under pressure, all needed polishing, all demanded more than they gave. But Jesus did the opposite. He gave everything and asked only for surrender. Demetrius looked down at the scroll. Then quietly, he pulled a small pouch from his coat. Inside were tiny pieces of old silver, fragments, leftovers from the idols he had broken. He walked to the water, kneeled, and whispered, "You saw me even when I was shaping lies." He opened the pouch and let the pieces fall one by one into the sea. They vanished without a splash, not because they were worthless, but because he didn't need them to prove anything anymore. He stood and breathed in the night air. It smelled like salt. And, starting over, behind him, footsteps approached. It was Kimon. "They're asking about you," the boy said with a smile. "In the house church. Someone wants to meet you." "Who?" Demetrius asked. Kimon shrugged. A traveler. Said his name's John. Demetrius raised an eyebrow. One of the disciples? I think so. Demetrius chuckled. I doubt he wants to meet an old idol maker. Kimon grinned. He said something interesting. He said you're one of the few who still has a good name. Demetrius blinked. A good name? Kimon nodded. He said your name was mentioned in one of his letters. Demetrius didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. He just smiled. Not the kind of smile he carved into silver, but the kind that came from being known and forgiven. Epilogue. Years later, in a scroll passed between believers, one quiet sentence was written. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, even by the truth itself. 3 John 1:12. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't silver. It was better. It was a name. A name that didn't melt in fire. A name carried not by idols, but by grace.